Hello and welcome. I'm Liz. I'm a local librarian here in Baltimore. I've been a DM for, I'll say over 10 years because that seems polite. Mostly of Dungeons and Dragons, and I am going to be your moderator today. So let's start in alphabetical order, go around starting with Christiana.
Hello, I'm Christiana Ellis, and I am an author and an engineer, but I also am very into role-playing games. I've only been running them for about 5 years now, but when I got in, I got way in, so I'm excited to talk about something I think is important. Should I keep going? Is there looking for more?
We're going to move on to Daniel. Sorry.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Dan Ford. I'm a fantasy and mystery novelist originally from Baltimore. I live in Newark, Delaware. I have been playing and running RPGs, starting with D&D, but running through a lot of others for 27 years. And I run an RPG club at the high school I teach at for my day job.
I guess I'm next, right? 'Cause we're going by first names. Yeah. Yo, what's good? I'm James Mendez Hodes. I live in the greater New York metropolitan area on traditional Lenape land. And I'm primarily a writer and a cultural consultant, working primarily in analog games. You might know my past work from 7th Sea or Scion, or on the cultural consulting side, Magic the Gathering or the Jackbox Party Pack games. I also do some pro GMing and regular GMing, but pro GMing a lot for kids. So that's influenced my views of like how to run games a lot.
I'm Lisa Padol. I've been gaming for years. And I've been editing role-playing games for Golden Goblin, Arc Dream, and anyone else who'll hire me. Yeah.
Excellent. James, you brought in audiences here, and Dan, you also mentioned that. So when we consider like in-game content and how we interact with, how we interact with our audiences and what we consider content for the feel. And I'm not sure, Lisa or Christiana, if you have the same perspective. I know I work with teens and children when I do my DMing these days. What do you consider about the content for younger kids? And we'll start with James.
So I think with younger kids, the biggest thing, two huge things that stand out, aside from the like peripheral problems of like getting them to calm down, which extend far beyond gaming. A couple of things. First of all, if you show kids two identical systems and you say everything is the same about these two systems, but this one is much more complicated and hard to learn, they'll go for this one. Like they'll see that as a challenge. That's the first thing. The second thing is that conflict is often easier to deal with because kids are much better than adults at getting corrected. If a kid says something sexist and you're like, hey, that sounded kind of sexist, they're like, oh, okay, sorry, I'll stop. If you say that to an adult, you'll get like 10 minutes of like defensiveness and apologizing and guilt and other reactions. So you actually have to like sort of tread a lot more carefully with adults, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Especially I've DM'd for different age groups. So like younger kids, I think you're right. They do take the correction a little more easily.
Yeah,
and you're right. They do love complicated systems. I was like, let's try fifth edition. That'll be new. And they're like, no, let's go back to 3.5. And I'm like, what are you doing to me? Do you know how much writing that is? Dan's going to be right back. We can move into a different direction until he does come back. So speaking of older players, I know some of us have been playing for a long time, cross-generational experiences. Has anyone found that working with older players, you have a little trouble like breaking them out of like their favorite? We've talked about in the a previous panel about their favorite like classes or races and why some of those may be problematic in newer settings with a more open audience? I'll leave that open to whoever wants to talk.
Okay. Well, so I don't know that I have had a specific problem with, older players that have like, worn in habits or anything like that. But I certainly have found it true that, even within a group of close friends, you have people who are looking for different things in games and want it to go differently. And so you have the players who absolutely love the role play and spending half an hour just really getting into the nitty gritty of how their characters feel about something. And then you have the other half of the party that's saying, come on, let's fight something.
A very fine point. I see Dan's back with us. Dan, did you want to bounce back that last question? We were talking about what it's like with younger audiences.
Sure. So most of my DMing these days tends to be with kids who are between 14 and 18, right? Because they're high school students. And I would absolutely agree with what James said. They are much more willing to be corrected. Now, that's part of that because they know me as Mr. Ford, not as Dan, not as friends that have known me for 20 years. So it's a totally different relationship to start, right? They're expecting to be taught, they're expecting to be told when they're doing the thing right or when they're doing or how they can improve on the thing. So it's actually, I have found kids are much more willing to embrace like conflict between characters because they're like, it's just a character. I can just make another one. It gives me a chance to play a new class or something. Whereas I feel, I would agree, adults are way less receptive to being corrected or having their behavior commented on in any way.
Yeah. And back to Christiana's point, it's not necessarily always about the like specific like societal stuff. Sometimes it's just like the interactions between people. Like some people are really about RP and some people are really about murder hobo. Do we any strong feelings about that?
You also get on zooming in a little, even people who are there for the same rough reason have certain directions they want to explore. I had a campaign essentially crash in the nicest possible way because we realized that one player wanted to go particularly dark and would be sad if we didn't, and at least one, probably two other players really didn't and would be really sad if we did. And what we did was say, okay, we'll do one more session to wrap it and move on because it had been working for a while. Then as GM, I stupidly put in material that I should have known if I had taken 2 seconds to think would bring that issue to a head. We found an in-game way of dealing with it and changing what we needed to change and moving on. But, no harm, no foul. But yes, we had conflicting desires.
I've noticed that different systems have different so some games I refer to as like tentpole systems. They're general enough in their offerings or in what they promise people that it's easy to get people to show up and agree to play the game. And then once that happens, like with D&D, it's really easy to get a lot of people to agree to play D&D with you because D&D says that it's a lot of things to a lot of people. Then practically speaking, once you've got everybody together, often conflict tends to pop up midway through the game because D&D is designed to do a lot of things kind of imperfectly. With other more focused systems, often it's harder for me to get people to agree to show up for them in the first place because you have to, there's not much written on the tin because it's a very small tin. But it does what it says on the tin. So it's hard to get people to buy in. But once they're there, it's easier to get longevity out of the campaign.
I think that's a good point about D&D being a lot of things to a lot of people. And particularly when, at least in my experience, it's been that the conflicts will start right at the start because no one wants to be the cleric, for example.
One more thought on that very point. Like I ran into that where I was running a game of Burn Bright, which is Roll20's recent game system, and we were a couple of sessions in and having a good time, But then when the new D&D Adventure module came out, people wanted to switch to that. Like the players wanted to switch to that because we were still learning the rules of the other one. And I think that people who know D&D already are afraid of that perceived learning curve of having to learn a new system. And whereas D&D feels easy, even though frequently it's actually more complicated than whatever the other game might be.
Yeah, I think especially when you look at things like that are in 3D space, like some of the Starfinder stuff with Paizo is more complicated than Pathfinder, which has like a lower barrier to entry. Although there's a ton of math in there, so let's not say it's too low. All right, well, on character creation and conflict within stuff, sometimes I think it pops up right at the start where maybe the DM has a setting in mind, and then you have a character who wants to be bad. We'll say that. It's good to be bad. I'm thinking particularly of my children, the Drow, almost always bad, and if not, then other stuff. But what do you do when you have a character or a player who wants to play a character who is bad, and your other characters are, you know, average to good?
Well, one of the things that I did with the most recent campaign for So Many Levels, which is the live stream actual play that I host, we started off preparing for our session 0, and I sent out like a poll for all of the players to answer certain questions about like what kind of campaign they were looking for, and some of those sorts of things, like do you want your characters to be more morally gray, or what sorts of things are you interested in? The mistake I think that I made is the assumption that once you get all of the answers, that just means that the average will please everybody. Which that was a lesson learned after the fact, is that, compromise, the old saying about compromise leaves all parties equally unhappy. Well, that can certainly be true in this sort of thing too. I mean, we worked it out, but there's certainly some lessons learned in there.
As a GM, especially with my RPG club, because I'm introducing these kids to it, and because it's school, there's just no evil allowed. You just can't do it. In fact, I usually tell them, unless you can explain to me why you need to be, lawful neutral or chaotic neutral when it comes to alignment, I don't even let them play that. We're being heroes or playing a good alignment, because that's how we learn to play the game. Generally speaking, with my adult friends that we've been playing together forever, they kind of know what stories I'm going to construct, and if they want to come out, if they want to play a blackguard or something, it's probably not going to go very well for them. They just come in knowing that. There's just certain sides of gaming I'm not super interested in doing, at least as a GM. If you want to do it as a GM with me at your table, that's fine. I come from a kind of at least with my group that we've known each other for so long, we fall into the GM gets to set the rules of what goes on at their table, right? I know that's not how a lot of people would do it, but we've also known each other for literally 25 years, some of us. So we're willing to let it go that way. And we know it's not going to be a problem for us, right? I know for a lot of other people, that stuff probably needs to be negotiated in advance, right? That stuff needs to be talked about. Because you may have just answered an ad, you may have just joined a game that you picked up on Discord or at your local game store or whatever. And that's a totally different situation, where if you come into that and the DM is just saying, my table, my rules, I don't think that's going to work.
Right. And then, of course, when you're in the school, you have the hero's journey as like an actual educational element. So you sort of have to boost yourself.
I actually I have a 4-grade or a 4-level system that I use to talk about like specific kinds of evil in games. I'm gonna send it just so you have it in text to panelists and attendees over in chat. But I originally wrote this for an article about historical gaming. So when you're looking at different kinds of evil, like let's say you're playing a game with a lot of evil, like even more than D&D, like vampire. If you're playing a vampire game, or another game that focuses on like if you're playing a samurai game where everyone's like nobility and it's kind of classist, there's going to be like a lot of war. For these kinds of games, I think it's important to discuss like different kinds of evil, sometimes before the game, but you know, you can't think of everything. So sometimes stuff's going to come up midway and you have to pause and talk about it. But to talk about like different kinds of evil that might come up in the game and which ones you as a group consent to coming up. So the 4 levels that are that I use for this are the basic level is stuff that's evil that we're not going to do in the game. It's not going to come up at all for heroes or villains. This would, if you're using lines and veils as a safety tool, this would be like a hard line. So like if you're vampires using mind control for sexy purposes is an example. There's another level, which is evil that might happen, but the players won't do it. And the bad guys, the NPCs, are the only ones who do it. And the assumption is that the players will oppose it if it comes up. So for a hypothetical vampire game, that might be vampires using mind control to order humans around. In some games, that's okay, but this might be an example of something that you might say, we don't want to deal with this in this particular vampire game. Another level up is evil, which the game engages with, but which is going to be a point of conflict between characters. So it's pre-baked into like, yes, we are going to argue with each other in character about this. So vampires socially manipulating humans is the example that I used. And then a last level, which is also really important to talk about, which is evil, which is going to be inherent to the setting, which we're going to engage with, but we're not going to question or interrogate or have conflict about it, which is, in this case, it might be vampires drinking human blood. Like there are some games where you might want vampires to argue over, like, should we drink human or animal blood or something like that. But for a lot of vampire games, you might just say, like, in order to play this game, it needs to be assumed that we're going to do this kind of evil. So looking at common forms of evil that are likely to come up and placing them on this scale of 4 levels, I think heads off a lot of conflict later on.
Yeah, it does a good job to address, especially like with those hard barriers, things that you don't want to come up. I know when I DM'd at a women's college, like things about like sexual trauma or anything like that were absolutely off the table. Like that's the ultimate evil that's never going to come up in a game. They're not going to interact with it.
Yeah. There's 2 broad things I want to look at here. The first is the idea of a group document, particularly when the pandemic started and I was in a lot of online good society games. What we had was a collaboration document, and we'd put in, these are things we don't want to see, these are things we do want. So when we were doing, for example, a play test of Avalon Society, King Arthur Good Society, we immediately said, no love potions. Just, we will not go there. We do want quests, wonders, and sword friendships. And one of the important things is you can always go back and change this. This is not a suicide pact. This is an agreement that you made at a particular point in time. You may decide further down the road, you know, I don't want my knights arguing about religion. You may decide further down the road, okay, so I didn't want graphic gore. You know, if everyone's okay with it, I think I can handle graphic gore, for example. The other thing, so around pre-2016, possibly pre-2010, a friend of mine was talking about what he called special snowflake syndrome. You sit down with your players. You tell them, this is what I'm running. This is the premise. You are all going to be Roman legionnaires in Romanized Britain. And someone will say, wait, can I be the cook? Hey, can I be a camp follower with the legions? Hey, can I be the little drummer boy with the legions? And maybe you go, okay, fine. You'll all be people attached to the legions. No one will be soldiers. Wait, can I be a soldier? Will instantly happen. So yeah, you want to sit down as a group. I think I did a survey once, and while it was useful to tell me which games I was capable of running that people were interested in, for the most part, I want character creation to be done as a group so that we can all see Ron Edwards once said, your character should be someone you would pay to see a movie about. That should be true of every single player character. We should all be invested in each other's characters, because otherwise you're going to have like 2 or 3 separate games going on.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good, and I like the idea of the shared document. I know, and maybe we can talk about this next. When you're thinking of the homebrew settings specifically, with the homebrew setting, you have the situation where there are new rules, and you have rules that are separate from like the rules. And one of the things that I did as a DM was we had handwritten rules. Every time we made a judgment call, that rule was written down, so someone couldn't say later, "Hey, you did this that one time," because it's in the book now. It's written. And it's a handy guiding document. So having something like that, even for just like barriers and things, but especially for homebrew settings, is a very good thing to keep in your pocket. Speaking of homebrew, any situations with, let's say, rules lawyers? That's a fun thing to do, especially with homebrew settings.
We have kind of a house rule in our group that's not even like a math rule. It is, we do not argue about the rules during the game, right? We do not discuss what the rule is during the game. During the game, the GM makes a call, we move forward with that rule. When the game is over, we will look it up. And if we're doing it wrong, and we want to adjust it, we'll adjust it. But during the game, we just don't stop and do it, right? And if we find out we're doing it wrong, we find out we're doing it wrong. And we either correct it or we don't if we like the way we were doing it better, right? But during the game itself, there is no arguing about a rule. Right, what the GM says is what the rule is until dice are put down.
Should make that a rule. I've never done that. We always let them argue. That's smart. Forgetting rules.
Well, this came about from having sessions in college that were 3 hours of arguing about the rules. Right, when 3rd edition was brand new, I realize I'm dating myself, and also it goes back to what Lisa said about having character creation done together, because we were all, 20, whatever, and we all wanted to play Men of Mystery, and we didn't want anybody else to know who our character was or anything about the background. And this one particular campaign devolved into 2 camps on either side of the table who were having meetings where we were casting, alarm and silence and passing notes in languages that we spoke, but the other characters didn't speak. So if they were spying on us, they wouldn't know. And the fact that we came through that and are all still friends and we're all in each other's weddings, I think is kind of a minor miracle, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
On that note, I've over time started to come to a position that, well, what I've encountered frequently is a desire as the DM to have characters get created in groups. And then inevitably, everyone comes to session 0 having already created their character. And then I guess I'm kind of willing to adapt it a little bit to what you're doing. And I think the next time I'm in that situation, I'm going to be a little bit more insistent on, do not write a 5-page backstory for a character prior to the session 0 where we're supposed to be making characters as a group. Because not everyone's going to do that. And then you end up with the situation of someone wants all of that 5-page backstory to matter, but someone else doesn't have all of that written, and it ends up making the campaign feel lopsided.
It can also be a sort of a barrier, especially for with children, particularly low literacy kids and teens. Like having that kind of extra reading and writing it's not making the game more enjoyable for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think just in general, I think maybe we can talk about this, but I will put out there as a declaration for discussion. The idea of having session 1 be your character's meeting for the first time is overrated, and it's better for them to already know each other at the start of the game. What do you guys think?
I usually think that's like, I would say that's usually true. I usually want the player characters to know each other at least a little bit. Unless someone has a particularly good idea for a first meeting scene. Another thing that I wanted to mention, to go back to the idea of rules lawyers a little bit, is in gaming we have all of these like oral traditions about game table villains. And common names of these supervillains are the min-maxer, the power gamer, the rules lawyer, the person who shows up with this many like notebooks full of their backstory and expects you all to read them or not read them if it's secrets. So I think one important thing to remember, since we're talking about handling in-game conflict, is these people are doing bad things. Sometimes they're not even bad. Sometimes min-maxing isn't bad. I like it. But they're doing these things often for very good reasons. And very often these kinds of behaviors which the community frowns upon are a result of something that's already in place in the game that incentivizes this kind of behavior. I used to
have a prime
play.
example of this.
Yeah.
In 3.5, if you want to play as a ranger, you're best playing as a fighter who uses bow and arrow.
Mhm.
And like you can get so many extra, yes, that's a great example. Like min-maxing is something that the game encourages you to do, but other players are like, please stop, it's the worst.
Yeah. In World of Darkness games, I don't know if they still have this, but back when I played like Vampire, it was, already out of print, but when I played like Vampire the Masquerade, you're incentivized to min-max during character creation. If you want to get like a lot of dots in something, the only reliable way to do it is to min-max your character during character creation and then level them out during the course of play. Every single game in the World of Darkness line and like Exalted and stuff, they all incentivized it, but the game community strongly frowned upon that. Because it was considered like min-maxy or unrealistic, or there were any number of quarrels with it. But it also resulted in like players coming to the game for the first time, noticing it incentivized something, and then feeling really bad when the community came down on them for something that the game essentially told them to do.
Sometimes with literal instructions. I remember with the prestige classes, especially in 3.5, like you had to go about it a specific way. You had to have specific stats. So like if you wanted that character, you had to min-max or you would never get to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah. With rules lawyering, so I run a lot of Gumshoe. Basically a game about solving mysteries one way or another, and exactly what kind of mysteries depends on which flavor of Gumshoe you're using. And when I first started off, I was leaning on that one player that knew the rules backwards and forwards. Rules lawyer, fine. You're taking care of this. I will trust you, and I will also trust that nothing my group will do in terms of following the rules, whatever we decide they are, is going to break the game. One thing I've also noticed, when somebody is playing in a certain way, especially if they're like being extremely paranoid, min-maxing, not engaging, the thought in my mind is, what the hell did your previous GM do to you?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just what the rules are pushing. What were your experiences as a player? How were you burned? Because a lot of us, even if we enjoyed it at the time, were burned by certain types of GMing. And no, I am not going to let you blip past me investigating every little spot of this room, because I know if I don't specify everything, and it doesn't matter if I say, no, I promise we will flash back. If I give you a mechanic you can hold on to, like, you can make a preparedness roll if it turns out you forgot some piece of equipment, maybe. But there's a lot of patterns as a GM you'll find you didn't start and you can't break.
Yeah, that's a good point about trying to undo the work of some GMs who've made some interesting choices. I had a particularly punitive GM who would punish people for what he would deem as chaotic stupid, but I think a reasonable DM wouldn't do that. So what are some good ways to sort of maybe try to unteach those things? I know, like when you have them like putting specific skills down, like appraise because their last GM was like everything's fake and you're going to get fake junk. like you're wasting skill points on something that maybe isn't super important to the story. How do you break some of that stuff or help them get past it?
I think a lot of this particular genre of like I don't know, like uh, past GM specific behavior. A lot of it has to do with information control. And a lot of the habits that people have about this are efforts to find more information and get all of the information about a situation because a previous GM punished them for not thinking of something. And it might have been by accident, or it might have been a GM who like really liked feeling like they were smarter than their players and they were outsmarting their players, and they were surrounded by like players who like to try to outsmart the GM, and so there was this sort of unspoken conflict that many people were like buying into on a table level. So when I GM, if I notice that that's starting to happen, one thing I always tell my players is I will always endeavor to give you more information than you need. As a player of a player character in a game, you will always have less information about a situation than that character would like in C2, because they have their five senses, they're hearing things, they're seeing things, they can look around them and see all of the information and just get it automatically. So when I GM, I'm always overly generous with information. And if a piece of information is like especially important, I'll overstate that, including saying out of character, like, yeah, please take this dagger. I need it for the plot later.
Mm-hmm.
And like that, it hurts some of the mystery sometimes, but I'd rather have that than like, put them in the Resident Evil situation where they have to backtrack all the way to get the magic thing so they can open the door.
No, that's smart, especially with younger players who don't know to think about that sort of thing. So they don't even have the unteaching thing. They just don't know what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know that they should do a specific spot check. Maybe they've never even heard that word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've struggled with this a little bit too. And occasionally we'll have players about to go into the dungeon, but now we need to talk about, well, let's put together an inventory list of all our gear and make sure we have all the right things. And oh, well, you know what? Maybe we ought to go back to the city first because I meant to buy more emeralds, and so on. And it'll go on like that. And I try to just, outside of game, to say to the players, you can trust me here. I'm trying to help you guys tell a cool story. I'm not trying to trick you into falling for something that's going to cause a TPK. Mm-hmm. If you guys end up getting stuck somewhere, maybe because that's part of a story that I want to tell, not because I'm punishing you for not thinking of something. Or alternately, maybe I just want you to go into the cool dungeon I made for you, and you're putting that off by imagining hypothetical ways that I might be tricking you. Mm-hmm. And so I will frequently just try to say, trust me, I'm gonna be fair. Like if it makes sense that you would have brought something, we can talk about that later. But let's not spend an hour talking about, are we ready to go into a cave yet?
Conversely, something that I often do as a player is if there's a certain situation and it feels like there's going to be a trap, something I sometimes ask the GM is this a trap? And would it be funny or cool if I walked into it? Because if you look like you really want to spring this trap, I can like see it in your face, and I can totally manufacture a reason for my character not to notice, mm-hmm. and just to say something. There was a GM who was clearly like making a whole bunch of rules in a superhero game for what happened if someone messed with the time stream. So I was like, okay, guys, just so you know, my character is totally going to be the one to mess up the time stream at some point. Like we're all cool with that, right? The GM seems excited. Let's do this.
One thing I often do on the player side is, because I have fellow GMs who I know get tired of this sort of overly deliberative, too careful, too prepared, cover every contingency player, is while they start arguing about what to do, I'm like, I kick the door down. Like I am walking down that hallway. You can talk. I'm going to go find the treasure. I tend to play a more impulsive, less restrained character who is not all that worried about being fully prepared, because that's going to lead to more fun stuff happening, right? That's going to lead to more fun stuff happening. And I always tell my players too, I believe the game should reward taking risks, right? I believe the game should reward risk and initiative and things like that. So if you take risks, I will find ways to rule of cool it, and I will find ways to make it interesting. And I'm more likely to reward you with something, whether that's a cool scene or items or whatever, or inspiration or experience points, whatever, if you just go do the thing instead of talking about the thing.
Mhm.
We're getting closer to the end, but I don't want to skip over. I know we haven't talked a lot about tabletop stuff. So for games like Munchkin, where you have intentional adversarial encounters between each other, how do we handle things that may, I don't know, elevate? Because you're not at that point a GM, but if you're in a room with children, someone has to control it. So how do you deal with party conflict with games that want you to argue with each other?
Fixing
My
Munchkin is
friends and
above
I
my
simply
pay grade.
don't play Munchkin anymore for that exact reason. Because once we held a Munchkin tournament where the guy who organized it literally put up money for the winner and for the person who cheated the most. There were like prizes, and it got kind of ugly. And I don't think we've played Munchkin in probably 10 years because of the events of that day. I won though. I just want to throw that out there. I did win the tournament.
Well, that's good. Yeah, Munchkin's problematic because it has intentional meta stuff. Like you can bring
Yeah.
stuff to the table that isn't in the box.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot depends on what you've agreed to. I mean, if you've agreed up front, I mean, I was in a one-shot convention game where the GM said, just so everybody knows, I am your adversary in this game. I will be going for you. Okay, I understand. I am sitting down at the table. Bring it. But also I mean, it boils down to good communication. I was in an online game of Cartel, and at one point somebody said, "Hey, Lisa, okay if I shoot you?" I'm like, well, assuming you mean my character and not me, yes.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I've had times when my character's toward the end of her life and I'm like, please just take me and loot my body. I want to move on. Let's go.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point, Lisa, that when we're talking about adversarial stuff, it's not necessarily between players. There are some modes of DMing and GMing where the DM is like, I'm the bad guy and you all have to beat me, but I have the winning hand. It's very tricky.
Yeah.
So
We
on the
should
other
talk about-
side, you know, the player side of that, does anyone want to talk about that perspective for them?
The player side of being the adversary to the GM.
Yeah. Because I feel like I'm sure most of us have had that happen at least once where you're just, you know, it's tricky.
I don't have that personal experience,
no?
but
You have nice DMs.
well, in general, yeah. You know, and actually, if I may, like that comes down to, of all the things that I've seen out there that give advice for this sort of thing, the piece that I feel like is frequently left out that I struggled with personally is that so much of the advice seems framed around there's a villain at the table and it's somebody, and it's either a player or a DM, and they're doing this horrible thing, and the advice is, how do we deal with this horrible villain doing this horrible thing? When in my experience, we have a group of close friends and the conflict arises from someone who is annoyed by something but doesn't want to hurt that person's feelings, and so they don't say anything until they get really mad. But there's not a villain. It's just like, even when you want to encourage communication, people feel awkward bringing stuff up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's not always an adversarial. It's not always an adversarial GM. I just think that's maybe something that's.
Yeah, I didn't mean to like.
No, that's a good point.
I mean, it depends. If I think the GM's playing fair, I'm usually okay with it. If you think the GM has broken the social contract you've made, or at least you think you've made, that's a different story. I mean, there was one time in a Fate game where, for reasons that had nothing to do with the system, all 4 players, we all looked at the GM and said, no, that is bull. And it is hard to get 4 players doing that. I hate conflict that I'm like, yeah, they're right. Means you've, whether accidentally or otherwise, done something you should not have done.
That's a fine point to mention that it's a social contract, because that is exactly what it is, and there has to be like a level of trust between the player and the GM. That's why we have open rolls on tables now and not hidden ones, because sometimes like I don't believe you rolled that, like as a player. It's understandable.
We should probably talk. We should probably talk about safety tools.
All right, I'll let you start.
Yeah, sure. So here's a great way to a lot of the things that we're talking about like conflict and opting into things and like how to manage these things are all founded on a principle of consent. That you're getting consent from people, you're getting people to agree to things before they happen. And we're making clear distinctions between like what our characters do and don't like, and what we as players do and don't like, which should supersede the character situation. So over the past 10 years, one of the coolest ways that has emerged in tabletop games and LARPing to deal with these situations is out of character safety tools. So these are signals and subsystems and mechanisms which sometimes they're built into a game, sometimes you can add them to any game, which allow you to express whether you're out of character into or not into something. My favorite one, because I was there when the first ever one was created, is the X card by John Stavropoulos from Queens, which is you make an index card, you draw an X on it, you put it in the middle of the table, and before the game you say, okay, so this game might have some stuff come up that we're not sure yet whether we are or aren't okay with it. So during the game, if anything happens that you out of character don't want to happen, you can tap the card or lift it. Then it's up to you whether you do or don't want to explain in detail what it is you don't like and why. And then when you do that, we're going to make a change to the game. We can say, all right, this time okay, but it's not going to happen again. We can say, let's replay that scene maybe a different way. We can say that didn't happen, and also that's not going to happen. You have various different options for how to deal with it.
I've seen that done with GMs who use like they give each character gets like a marble or something, and you get like 1 or 2 points to mulligan something in a game immediately. Like you stop the game and you can fix it, especially if it's something that's upsetting or offensive or something that doesn't feel right, and that player gets to set the frame for the table that 1 time or the 2 times for that campaign setting.
Then there's a similar version you might see in LARPing used is okay check-in, where you make the if you're looking at someone, let's say they're like crying or something, they're having like an intense interaction in a LARP, and you can't tell whether they're just like getting really into the acting or they're actually upset. So you flash the okay symbol at them. They could say like, yeah, I'm crying, but this is, I'm into it, so let's keep going. Like I'm okay with where it is, but let's not take it further, or not feeling good. And then you stop the game, you take that person aside, you make sure they're okay.
Right.
I've seen that expressed like a traffic light. Like there's red, which is like the X card is saying, no, don't like that, we need to change it. Yellow is like, let's be careful. And then green is like, no, I love this, keep going.
Yeah.
I really like the concept of safety tools also, and so I've been trying to conscientiously make them a part of my games as well. But I think it's also, as much as they are great tools, I think that it's important to remember that there are going to be some people at the table who, even if they are told up front, these tools are for you, please use them if you ever feel uncomfortable, there are going to be people who are shy about interrupting things, or they're going to worry that like, oh, well, this bothers me, but if it's not bothering anybody else, maybe I can just take it, and are afraid to use it. And so I think you have to remember and be conscientious of the fact that there are going to be some people who hesitate even when they would want to use it. So you have to be careful there still. The safety tools presence is not enough to guarantee that everyone's fine.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's part of the GM's job, is to check in with the players. Dan, final thoughts on this, and then we're gonna do our closing.
I think safety tools are great. I think that the important thing, building off what Christiana just said, is make sure everybody feels safe enough to use them too, right? Like you can literally speak up at any time. Just make sure they know that, right? You can speak up and stop this at any time if it's reaching into an uncomfortable place for you. Everybody should be having fun, right? And if you reach a point where you're not having fun, you need to be comfortable enough to say that.
Even if you're the GM.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, let's do reverse alphabetical order. Start with Lisa. Anything you want to plug, talk about on our way out?
Well, let's see. My most recent project that came into print was editing Eldritch New England, Call of Cthulhu scenarios where you're playing kids. It is a little gentler than your average Call of Cthulhu game for obvious reasons. And in June, I think we're finally going to see a hard copy of Impossible Landscapes from Delta Green. Not for kids, and oh my God, it is one of the most beautiful things I've ever worked on.
So yeah, so I'm James Mendez Hodes. You can find me on the internet at jamesmendezhodes.com and on Twitter at Lulavampiro. And I just sent those to the chat also. Upcoming projects I'm working on. Well, Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra is getting an official RPG, and I'm one of the senior designers on that. So look out for that coming pretty soon.
Me. I'm Dan Ford. You can find me on Twitter at Sounding Line. I'll keep one eye on the Discord. My next panel is at 5:30 on nonlinear narratives, and my next book is The Warden, coming in 2022 from Tor Books.
I'm Christiana Ellis. Everything that I do online goes up at christianaellis.com, and I'm at Christiana Ellis on Twitter. I've, aligned them pretty well that way. My most gaming specific content is So Many Levels, which is the live stream actual play that I run. I currently have 2 D&D campaigns going, one homebrew and one that's currently running through the end game of Rime of the Frost Maiden, the D&D module. But we do play some things other than D&D sometimes also. But you can find that at christianaellis.com, and the videos post to YouTube, and then there's audio podcast as well.
Excellent. And I am Liz Bosarge. I'm here in Baltimore. So if you live in the city, come visit me at the library. We have our science fiction boxes coming out for Summer Challenge on Tuesday, because there's a holiday on Monday. And hopefully I'll see you all then. And if you are a teenager and you're watching this panel, we have a Discord where you can play D&D with other cool teenagers at the Pratt. Oh, we had 1 minute left. Last thoughts. Look, I've gone over every time. So close.
I just don't want to step on anybody.
Ben Richard's Guide to Ravenloft looks good.
Yes.
It's got some great
good.
stuff in there with what we talked about too, in terms of talking about safety tools. And in particular, some nice stuff in there about like avoiding harmful tropes that have been common to some genres of horror.
Yeah.
It also explicitly says you're out to scare the characters, not the players.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and John Stavropoulos, author of the X Guard, worked on that.
Yeah, I believe he's credited directly for that.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's actually time, but we should have talked about the harmful tropes. I knew I forgot something.
Oh, well.